David Cameron is the London-born, Eton-educated, Prime Minister and MP for Witney who believes he's the handyman to fix UK plc and sort out broken Britain. But is there more to this progressive, caring Conservative than his Thatcher-light, Blair-like image? There was a time, before Iraq, when Britain was booming, that admitting to being a nice but dim-tim Tory card-carrying member of the nasty party was social suicide. So meet the man who remade the Conservative Party a political force ready to take national power. Perhaps the most admirable characteristic of this father of three is that he refrained from making political capital out of his most painful personal experience. His eldest son, Ivan, suffered from cerebral palsy, which meant David experienced firsthand both the best and the worst of the NHS. Since Ivan's death, aged just 6, David has commented on the shortfalls in the system but with a remarkable restraint, and it's this commitment to the NHS which has differentiated him from previous Conservatives and made him acceptable to many swing voters. When columnist Peter Hitchens read how stoically David dealt with Ivan, he publicly apologized for his earlier comments that David had never been tested. David Cameron was born Conservative. Not only has he connections to royalty, but there are 3 conspicuous Conservative MPs in the family tree. His disabled stockbroker father welcomed in the future 4th one in October 1966. David spent his first 3 years in Kensington and Chelsea before moving to Berkshire. His childhood featured a nanny and a swimming pool, and his education was prep school, Eton, and then Oxford. He'd spent his gap year before university working for a Sussex MP, and a shipping agent in Hong Kong, returning from there by rail through Eastern Europe. David's Oxford tutor for philosophy, politics, and economics remembers him as politically moderate, but critics seize on his time in the notorious Bullingdon Club. His membership of this exclusive clique, where wealth is prerequisite and excess is characteristic, is seen by some as proof that he was a hardcore, right-wing, free-market Thatcherite disciple. That embarrassing and infamous photo of him with, amongst others, Boris Johnson, now London mayor, must be seen in context. The 80s were a decade where the left wing of politics virtually vanished and, more importantly, how many present-day professionals would include their student photos in their CV? He has understandably remained quiet over claims he smoked cannabis, or took cocaine, citing the right to a private life before he entered politics. In 1988, he left Oxford with a first and secured a research job with the Conservative Party. He progressed to special advisor for the Treasury and then Home Office, finding he had a particular affinity for preparing ministers for media appearances. But Cameron wasn't always successful. He allowed his Chancellor boss, Norman Lamont, to respond "Any regret rein" to an economic question post the £1 billion blunder that was Black Wednesday. Lamont mangled the pronunciation and came across as doubly incompetent. Cameron also wrote him a storming speech that, due to technical reasons, went disastrously. Cameron learned from these 2 lessons. Firstly, the media message is everything, and secondly, never, ever rely on a script. Cameron's later apparently off-cuff speeches would be the making of him. And while Cameron's backroom ascent was anything but assured, he always showed relentless energy. Having found his vocation, in 1993 he then met the love of his life, the tattoo-sporting, trip-hop tricky friend, and a baronet's daughter, Samantha Sheffield. She'd been raised on an estate, a 300-acre one, and boasted a bloodline that rivaled his. David wanted marriage immediately. She agreed in 1996. Samantha's stepfather had ministerial responsibility for broadcasting, and both he and her mother were helpful when David decided to gain business experience as a spin doctor for a big UK media company, Carlton Communications, which had the ITV franchise. Inevitably, many journalists don't remember his time there with fondness, but his boss, TV tycoon Michael Green, thought him a shrewd operator and offered him a career. But after 7 years there, and with enough world experience to deflect criticism that he was merely a career politician, David decided it was time to return to the fray. Unfortunately for David, he returned to politics just as the country turned red. He lost his North Birmingham Stafford safe seat in the 1997 New Labour bloodbath. What his party and leaders did next was to make many, William Hague, many, Ian Duncan Smith, many, Michael Howard, mistakes. The only consolation for Cameron during these wilderness years was that it was a textbook of how not to do it. His party would endure 2 more election defeats, in 2001 and 2005, before they were ready to look for salvation in an unexpected corner. In June 2001, he became MP for the Witney, an Oxfordshire market town. Over the following years, he occupied a number of shadow jobs, from finance to education, and it was during his time as policy coordinator that he almost imperceptibly began the party's shift to the centre. But his ascent to leadership was inauspicious. He himself said he could have got his supporters in the back of a London taxi with a bit of room to spare. However, he had learned from Lamont's speech misfortune and he addressed the party conference without notes. It propelled him from underdog to front-runner, and just 5 years after being elected an MP, he was elected leader of the opposition in December 2005. But throughout August and September 2007, it looked like his brief stay at the top could end if Brown capitalized on soaring ratings. Cameron responded by addressing his troops at the party conference without the armor of an autocue. Brown blinked. Cameron capitalized on the indecision, swiftly circulating the message that Brown had bottled it. Cameron relentlessly held onto the lead he thus secured. He will now not even allow a party member to drink champagne for fear that cameras will capture it and suggest his chaps are comfortable in their success. There is a contradiction in Cameron. He represents exactly the uncaring, moneyed classes that were rejected by voters as unrepresentative over 3 elections, and yet, it is Cameron that has repositioned himself as an everyman, by chatting away on Mumsnet and webcam Aaron, and his party as drawn from the electorate, by increasing ethnic and female candidates. He's in sharp contrast to previous leaders like Heath, Thatcher, and Major, who boasted ordinary backgrounds as their pedigree. David Cameron hopes to lead the UK as a Conservative PM, the likes of which have not been seen Harold Macmillan and his Etonian cabinet in the early 60s. But Cameron's media expertise means that even if he fails to present himself as classless, he has succeeded in presenting himself as not of his class. Not surprisingly, establishing the core beliefs of this chameleon is not easy. His conservative bio page spouts the usual meaningless slogans common to all politicians. For example, he believes there is a need for change in times of recession and for cutting red tape, as if anyone promoted staying stagnant and stifling bureaucracy. There's the usual dogmatic conservative belief in the reduction of taxes, which many believe the practicalities of recession will erode. What is known is that while he may be predictably right-wing on the economy, he's unusually liberal on drugs and gays, at least for a conservative leader. He said sorry for Section 28, the Tory legislation that banned promotion of homosexuality in schools. And he hasn't stopped there. He said sorry for imposing the poll tax on the Scots first. Thatcher's no such thing as society. Her calling Nelson Mandela's ANC a terrorist organization. Criticizing the estate from which Karen Matthews came, the shameless mother who conspired in kidnap of her daughter for publicity and profit. Not realizing the recession was coming, but that was more of a political maneuver to embarrass the PM Brown for his time as Chancellor. His mild swearing on radio. Minor factual inaccuracies over Muslim school funding. Imitating a Tony Blair hand gesture when being interviewed by Jonathan Ross. Some may see all of the above as meaningless utterances designed simply to win votes, but he was genuinely risking opprobrium from the right of his party for some of the above. For there are many hardliners, such as Lord Talbot, waiting for him to make a mistake and restore their party to the right. Cameron emerged remarkably unscathed from the MP's expenses scandal, having only to repay for, among other things, claiming for the clearing of wisteria from the chimney of one of his homes. Many ask why he needs to claim anything, considering it's claimed the Camerons are worth £30 million. This widely circulated figure is inaccurate in that it refers to their wider family wealth. But even if this is so, it again highlights the almost inconceivable moneyed world which he considers normal. But that is not what the media focused on. Instead, they went for the aristocratic country house owning, moat cleaning, old guard of the Tories, as well, of course, as the greedy new Labour MPs. It's been suggested that Cameron, ever the Machiavellian, actually used the bad news story of MPs' expenses to bury many of his greater political rivals who resisted his modernising efforts. If anything, it has been his financial allies, such as the billionaire from Belize, the £1 million donor to the Conservative Party, that have caused the most economic embarrassment to Cameron. The non-domicile lord has, quite legally, avoided paying millions in taxes. Not really what Cameron meant when he stated the Conservatives were still a party of low taxes. The red in tooth and claw rivalries of whether to join in or to jettison Europe helped make the Conservatives unelectable. It's this threat that history will repeat itself that has helped Cameron unite his factions. A federal Europe of one currency may be friend or foe, but it is an academic enemy as long as there remains the real and present danger of yet another new Labour government. But the emerging superpowers of China and India threaten the US hegemony under which the UK enjoyed a superficial splendid isolation. Despite this, Cameron has taken the calculated risk of distancing himself from his natural allies in Europe, the centre-right politics of German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy. Personally, Cameron has always been as Eurosceptic as Thatcher, and politically, this move plays well with his rank and file. His adversity to economic union with Europe was undoubtedly informed by his professional experience of seeing his then boss, Norman Lamont, and his country's currency, humiliatingly withdrawn from the European exchange on 1992's Black Wednesday at a cost of over £3 billion. And before the credit crunch, that was considered a lot of money. Cameron has said that he won't abandon the EU, but he certainly won't adopt the euro. He will try to repatriate some of the social policy appropriated by Europe, and his fundamental opposition to the centralization inherent in the Lisbon Treaty will cause external conflict with, amongst others, France and Germany. It has also resulted in some very odd new extremist allies in Europe who are diametrically opposed to his socially liberal viewpoint. The Latvian Fatherland and Freedom Party is one, and as their name suggests, they are not renowned for their ethnically tolerant views. But for now, his achievement is in reconciling the conflicting interests within his own party and turning them from laughing stock to leading in the polls. Airbrushed posters of Cameron campaign posters saying "We can't go on like this" were similarly retouched by the public with satirical slogans added. Interestingly, for a medium noted for its bile, the majority of online contributions have a warm humor, showing affection rather than aversion. David Cameron says on his website that his greatest achievement is getting the Conservative Party listened to again. The former spin master may not always be in control of the message, but there's no doubting the fact that he's redrawn the UK political scene around his own image. In 2010, after 18 years' absence, Cameron took the Conservatives back into power, sort of. His coalition, the first in over 50 years, with Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems, has been an uneasy and sometimes unwieldy alliance. 3 years before the coalition government, Cameron had hired Andy Coulson, former editor of the now infamous tabloid News of the World, as director of his communications. As the phone hacking scandal built, Coulson was an early casualty in 2011. The resulting spotlight exposed a cozy elite of politicians, press, and police. Cameron's relationship with Rebecca Brooks, another former News of the World editor, further damaged the Prime Minister. His embarrassing texts to her made front-page news. Critics pointed out that the Prime Minister had hired and socialized with people later charged with perjury and phone hacking. His veto in December 2012 on treaty changes in the European Union may have won him popular support, but it deeply irritated Clegg. Then again, Cameron had exactly the reverse effect with his promotion of gay marriage. Many, including liberals and homosexuals, were in disbelief that he expended so much political capital. But he did. And in February 2013, the Commons backed him. In austerity Britain, however, it's often economics, rather than politics that dominate. And here, despite the deficit, Cameron found himself as impotent as other politicians in dealing with everything from billion-pound corporate tax avoiders to bankers' bonuses. He's distantly related to the Queen, Eton-educated and comes from a long family line of Conservative MPs, but Prime Minister David Cameron is keen to distance himself from the tough stereotype. Born David William Donald Cameron on October 9, 1966, the Prime Minister to be spent the first 3 years of his life in London's affluent Kensington and Chelsea borough, before his family relocated to Newbury. Growing up alongside siblings Alec, Tanya, and Claire, David says he had a happy childhood, following in his family's esteemed footsteps by attending Eton. He achieved 12 not very good O-levels, by his own admission, but went on to gain 4 as at A-level, and won a place at Oxford to read philosophy, politics, and economics. Before settling down to student life, he broadened his horizons by taking a gap year. During this time he gained valuable experience working for a Sussex MP, then headed east to take up a post with a shipping agent in Hong Kong, returning on an extended rail trip through the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Surprisingly, David shunned student politics during his time at university, throwing himself into sporting activities such as tennis. He was captain of Brasenose College's team, and becoming a member of party-loving Bullingdon Dining Club. He wanted to have a good time, explains Steve Rathbone, an old chum. But his fun-loving antics didn't cost him one jot. The bright student graduated with a first-class degree and went on to get a job in the Conservative Research Department, quickly establishing himself as a major talent and progressing at an incredible rate. Before long, he was briefing then PM John Major for Prime Minister's questions. He went on to become a political advisor to Home Secretary Michael Howard before leaving to gain expertise in other areas, accepting PR work with ITV's TV company Carlton, where he stayed for 7 years as head of corporate communications. A year before jumping back into politics on a part-time basis, David tied the knot with his long-term love Samantha Sheffield, daughter of Sir Reginald Adrian Berkeley Sheffield, 8th Baronet, who he'd met through his sister Claire. In 2001, he won the Conservative seat of Witney, paving the way for his rise up the political ladder. He became leader of the Conservative Party in 2006, and went on to secure the majority of the vote in the 2010 election, but taking up post at 10 Downing Street was far from simple. Having fallen short of the 326 seats needed to form a majority government, a hung parliament was declared for the first time since 1974. Days of negotiations ensued, and the Conservatives formed a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. David moved into Downing Street on May 12, 6 days after the election was held, and announced, "It's a new era for Britain. Now, let's get to work." If one word could be used to describe the Conservative government under David Cameron, it would be austerity. Cameron described the economic situation as he came to power as even worse than we thought and warned of difficult decisions to be made over spending cuts. Cameron claimed to prioritize the NHS, introducing the Health and Social Care Act 2012, which has been described as the most extensive reworking of the structure of the NHS ever undertaken, yet critics suggested that the bill encouraged privatization. In 2015 he won a second general election, ensuring his premiership and cementing his popularity. As per a promise in his manifesto, the Prime Minister called for a referendum as to whether Britain should remain in the EU, riding off the success of the Scottish referendum, which saw Scotland remain a part of the United Kingdom. He particularly supported Britain's remain in the EU. As the results came in, announcing Britain would leave the EU, Cameron announced his resignation as Prime Minister. After Cameron left office, he became a lord and became an advisor to Greensill Capital, holding share options in the company. Yet in 2020, Greensill collapsed. It had been discovered Cameron had lobbied for Greensill to join the coveted corporate financing facility, a government loan scheme. As Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reshuffled the cabinet in November 2023, he announced that David Cameron, no longer an MP, would return to Parliament as the Foreign Secretary. He became a dad, to son Ivan, who was born in 2002 severely disabled and needing round-the-clock care for his cerebral palsy and severe epilepsy. Daughter Nancy followed in 2004, and son Arthur was born in 2006, a year after he became leader of the Conservative Party. But tragedy struck when little Ivan, just 6 years old, passed away on February 25, 2009. To start with, I thought, to hell with everything, David later said, revealing that the enormous grief of losing a child almost made him give up politics altogether. You do, it's just such a shock you can't really come to terms with it to start with. But, bit by bit, you start to think, well, I need to get on with my life. And to me my life is politics, it's public service. It's what I do. And, in the wake of their loss, there was happier news to come. The couple were completely thrilled when in the spring of 2010, just ahead of the general election, they revealed that Samantha was expecting another child in September. The timing is obviously not absolutely ideal, but we were very keen to have another baby after Ivan died, and sometimes it takes a while before the stork drops one down the chimney, said the proud dad. A bouncing baby girl named Florence arrived in August, 1 month early. He left prime ministerial office in 2016. Some might say that since his departure from Downing Street, the quality of his successors has steadily deteriorated, prime ministers as Russian dolls. But there is a case for saying that Cameron was the worst prime minister of them all, if the criterion is which one made the biggest, most consequential unforced error. Of course, there is a case for the worst premier being Boris Johnson, who somehow went from winning a substantial majority to resigning from Parliament in less than 3 years. Or for Liz Truss, who managed a mere 44 days and tanked the economy. Or even the current Premier Rishi Sunak, who has failed to achieve any of his signature policies, Rwanda, the smoking ban and so on, and is hurtling his party towards a likely heavy defeat in July's general election. Those three are examples of failures by prime ministers, but they are micro-failures compared to the macro-failure of Cameron. Even the strategic mistakes of Theresa May in insisting on harmful red lines for Brexit and in making the Article 50 notification for withdrawal prematurely, thereby meaning the UK was bested in negotiations by the EU, are lesser wrongs than that one calamity committed by Cameron. For it was Cameron who had the wheeze of a Brexit referendum without any notion of what to actually do if there was a vote for leave. He took the future of the United Kingdom and risked it on one turn of pitch and toss, and he lost. The sheer magnitude of that political decision is still becoming apparent. Because no thought was put into the contingency of defeat, the politics of the UK since 2016 have been in a continually unstable state. The bad, mad, and sad premierships of Johnson, Truss and Sunak respectively are merely features of this turmoil. The government has often seemed little different from a box of frogs. And because no thought was given to the shape of Brexit, the UK adopted an extreme form of departure, shut out from the very single market that Margaret Thatcher and her minister Lord Cockfield helped to build in the 1980s. It was also a Brexit that injected needless volatility into the politics of Northern Ireland, even threatening the peace process that John Major and Tony Blair helped to put in place. As such, not only did Cameron undermine his own record, he also undermined the real achievements of many of his recent predecessors. His prompt resignation after the referendum ushered in a hectic period of politics which still has not really ended. He could not even stay to sort out his mess. The referendum achieved virtually the opposite of what Cameron wanted it to achieve. Far from securing the future of the UK in the EU and seeing off Nigel Farage's insurgent UKIP, in 2024 none of the main three UK-wide political parties dare to propose rejoining. And Farage has certainly not gone away and is again leading an insurgent party. The focus on migration and culture war politics, the populist politics of division, of constantly setting one group against another have thrived in the post-Brexit climate. Brexit and post-Brexit populism has also distracted ministers from other tasks, and in almost every area of public policy there has been drift and decay, from the courts to the NHS, from the climate to housing. The wreckage of Cameron's folly is all around, and it grows with time. Even the centre-right party he once led is being destroyed. The moderates have left or been cast out, and it is predicted to suffer a heavy defeat next month. The Conservative and Unionist Party will soon cease to have many Conservative MPs, and the union with Northern Ireland may not last for many years longer. By embracing Brexit, the Conservatives may end up being devoured by the revolution they brought about. Yet there Cameron poses with the world leaders, as if nothing has happened, as if he has been Prime Minister continuously since 2010. He was literally standing in the same position he would have been in, had he carried on as Premier until now, the one person for whom Brexit appears to have not made any real, ultimate difference. Thank you for watching this video.